Hello, good morning, and welcome to Fast Forward Diversity and Inclusion. My name is Isa Buencamino, and my co-host is Hannah Wilson. Ooh. Fast Forward Diversity Inclusion is a series of conversations that aim to fast forward our D&I orientation, allowing advocates to build from what's already been achieved and to take the agenda to new heights. We believe that stretching our D&I orientation to a more global perspective enhances our ability to empathize and understand the lived experiences of others, to do something personally about it in a meaningful way.
So our guest today, we're really lucky to have two speakers from UK Youth. UK Youth are a leading national charity, a charity that's committed to enabling young people in society to have voice and agency to affect meaningful change. Some of you will know Didnt, who used to be at Teach First and Pearson, and she's their new CEO. So when I reached out to ask her to be on the podcast, she said, no, I want some of the young people to come and join you, Hannah. So thank you to Kaylee and Emma for finding us Joshua and Sabrina. So firstly, we have Sabrina Jones. Sabrina is on the advisory board for UK Youth. She is the founder of a not-for-profit social enterprise called Say It With Your Chest, and she works with young people who are highest at risk for being excluded from school. Joshua Olasehinde is at the Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge. He's a regular speaker for the UK Youth events and launched the UK Youth Fund in January. He's taken part in research for the British Council, and both of them are going to share really the kind of the barriers that young people are facing being young and Black in society today.
So welcome, Sabrina and Joshua. So the first question we're going to ask each of you is how you came to champion equity, diversity, and inclusion, and why this is important to you. So we'll start with Josh. Josh?
Hello, good morning. How I came to champion inclusion is I was the BME officer for my previous university, and one big issue we tended to face, which was at Northampton, was the attainment gap, and that was only really something I only realized when I got to uni, that students aren't really seeing the opportunities that are available towards them, and that's not necessarily to blame on the university or the students, but they are present, and sometimes self-sabotaging can take place. So
Josh, we've lost you. You've turned yourself on mute, love.
I apologize about that. Sorry. So I was saying, as someone who has done a lot of stuff for the UK Youth Voice as well, they've also taught me a lot on how companies and how businesses can be very supportive towards people within these BME communities. And that has really been important to me. Other reasons why this has been important to me is because I've realized that when we provided campaigns and events for my university back in Northampton, and we did surveys, it better prepared students for a global economy. It helped build confidence later in life, and it also promoted empathy and reduced prejudice. A lot of students also fostered creativity, because diversity in the classroom encouraged problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. Collaborative groups are excellent tools for classroom instructions, which are just examples of how our university tried to really tackle diversity in our school. So thank you very much. What else? And that is why it has been so important to me.
Thank you, Joshua. Sabrina, do you want to answer the same question first of all, and just tell us, so how did you get involved in this work, and what's your main driving force?
Hi everyone. So how I got involved in this work is, for me, I think I've always grown up with the belief that it's important to treat everyone equally and everyone deserves the same chances as everyone else. And it was apparent to me that that's not necessarily what always happens in society. So in society, there's always going to be things which put you at an advantage or disadvantage. So for example, I live in England and we have access to free education here. But if you went to a third world country, that's not something which they have access to. So for me, it's important that wherever I can, that I help others have the same opportunities that I do, but also everyone needs to be on an equal playing field. And at the moment, that isn't necessarily the case. For example, in the education sector, only 1% of head teachers are BAME. But obviously there's lots of BAME teachers in the education sector. So it's important for me that everyone has the same opportunities, but also everyone is made to feel that they actually want to apply for those opportunities. Because I'm not a teacher, but if I was a teacher and I'm aware that only 1% of head teachers are BAME, that's not necessarily going to encourage me to want to become a head teacher. Also, another reason why I got involved in this, especially with my social enterprise CHS, is that I realised that certain students are disproportionately excluded. And although reports such as the Didnt report has highlighted that this is the case, nobody can explain why, for example, Black Caribbean students are 4 times more likely to be excluded. So for me, it's important that we look at not necessarily what is the problem, but also we need to come up with what the solution is and also why is this occurring in the first place.
Brilliant. Thank you both for those really clear introductions. That was really, really helpful for us to understand like who you are and why you're here. And just before we go to like questions to each of you, can you just tell us a bit about the UK Youth Young and Black campaign? So Joshua, what's your involvement? And I will ask Sabrina the same. Josh, what's this campaign and how did you get involved?
Well, the Young and Black campaign has really been created just to more teach and educate and raise awareness on the seriousness of the issues that go on in the BME community. Also, it helps promote mental health. That has been a big topic that we've been going through. So I think overall, our main goals within UK Youth is just to promote that diversity and push understanding and awareness. And that is my input and how much I have done in that campaign.
Thank you, Josh. That's brilliant. How about you, Sabrina? What's your involvement?
So my involvement's been from the very beginning. So I'm sure most people are aware of what happened with George Floyd, and UK Youth received kind of like a lot of comments from youth organisations, but also young people saying, you know, we want to do something, but we don't necessarily know what to do. And I think the main thing which we identified is that young Black people don't feel like there's a safe space where they can share their stories, but also people don't necessarily know how to facilitate those conversations for young people to share their stories in the first place. So that's why the Young and Black campaign came about in collaboration with, for example, Diana Ward, My Life, My Say, and Jermaine Jackman. And the whole idea of the campaign is for young and Black people to be able to share the experience of what it is like being young and Black in Britain, because personally speaking for me, that's something which I've never shared what it's been like for me growing up young and Black. But that campaign has enabled a safe space to be created and for people to know if they are young and Black that they're not necessarily alone with what they've experienced. But most importantly, it's about educating people and raising awareness of things which they wouldn't necessarily have been aware of. And it's great to see that from it, that young people who are Black feel more empowered to speak about their experiences, and other people are more willing to listen, which I think is really important, because for things to change, people need to listen to what experiences of young Black people are like today.
I want to say that it feels absolutely fantastic to know that, you know, there are guys like you who at your age already doing so many positive things for this agenda. It is so reassuring. So I just want to say, well done. Awesome. Now I want to ask about the actual campaign, and you were talking about, you know, how people shared what's it like to grow up to be Black in Britain. I mean, is it all right for me to ask you what were the key themes, or what is it like? Is that okay to ask? Maybe start with Sabrina.
So I would say everyone in life has certain qualities or life experiences which will make them more disadvantaged or advantaged. For example, me being a female, in certain jobs that might put me at a disadvantage, or it might make it less likely that, for instance, I might become a director of a company or be on the board. Personally, for me, growing up young and Black in the UK, I was aware that there's certain things which I would have to try harder on. So, for example, Black students are more likely to be predicted lower grades than their peers. And research which was actually done this year found that Black students are actually 7 times more likely to be predicted lower grades than their peer. But when it comes to results day, they actually receive the same grades or better, which shows that in the educational system, sometimes the academic ability of Black students is underestimated. Another example, I was very aware that when I went to university, I did a psychology degree, that Black students are less likely to get a 2-1 or a first. So for me, I'd say in terms of the educational system, I was very much aware that I would have to try harder to try and not be another statistic. And I think it's important where I'm working with young people with SHS, and the whole idea is about empowering young people to be the best version of themselves. I need to be an example that although it may be the case that statistically speaking, Black people don't necessarily achieve certain grades, that actually, if there's a role model who they can look up to and say, actually, look, Sabrina is working with us here in this school and she has achieved this, it can act as motivation, because a lot of the young people that we work with during our workshops and one-to-one mentoring sessions, they don't have any aspirations because they don't see people who look like them who are in the careers they want to do, or maybe their family haven't gone to university. So I think it's very important that there are role models that Black people can look up to. So, for example, when I was at school, in both primary school and secondary school, I didn't ever have a teacher who wasn't white. All of my teachers were white. So, for example, if I did want to be a teacher and I have never had experiences of somebody that looks like me, I'm not going to feel like I can be in a career like that because I don't see anyone that's representative of me. And I'd also say, in terms of growing up Black in Britain, it's also about, there's lots of opportunities out there, but it's about having the resilience within yourself to find those opportunities. And that's why I think it's really important that in schools especially, there's a support system where students are empowered to raise their aspirations and they're empowered to do anything they want to do. Because a lot of the young people that I work with, their family life isn't that great, or maybe their parents aren't as supportive as they should be. So it's important that if that support system isn't necessarily coming from their family, that society makes young Black people feel like, you know, they can be what they want to be and they can do what they want to do. But if there's no role models out there and there's nobody in those careers that look like these Black people, then it's going to be harder to aspire to want to actually do anything, if that makes sense.
So I wanted to follow up on that, Sab. I mean, you're talking about the work that you do around making sure that, you know, people don't become a statistic, right? But you must be, your reaction to what happened to the A-level results, I mean, that is that example of statistic gone mad, I guess. So I want to ask you, you know, you're founder of Say It With Your Chest. Are you guys doing anything about it? Are you responding to government? Is there anything that you are doing right now just to help fix that?
I think the best thing that can be done is to empower the young people to raise aspirations. So, for example, there's always going to be obstacles in life that might hold you back from what you want to do, but it's about having that knowledge within yourself that although it may be holding you back in an ideal situation, knowing that you can still achieve what you want to do. And I think that's why it's important that there are programs like what SHS does, where we empower young people to raise aspirations, because there's certain things that we can't control. I can't control what the government has done, but if you've instilled confidence and you've instilled resilience in young people, they're going to be more likely to be able to persevere so that they can still reach their goals. So, for example, when I was at school, I was put in academic sets where the highest grade I could get, for example, would be a C, but I knew that to go to university, I wanted more than a C. And I was based on that set, not necessarily on my academic ability, but that's just because of what the teachers presumed my ability was. And if I didn't have that resilience, and if I didn't have a supportive family who said, no, actually, you can work harder, you know, we can speak to the school about moving sets, I wouldn't have then been able to although I didn't change sets, I was then entered in for a higher paper. So therefore I was able to achieve the grades I needed. So that's an example of there's something which I couldn't necessarily change in terms of the sets, but I had to work with what I could change. I could change the paper I did, and I could work hard to get the grade I needed, and I did get that grade. So I think what's happened with the A-level results, the most important thing is that we need to be supporting the young people, we need to be empowering them, because in life they're always going to face obstacles, and that's something that I personally can't change, nobody can change. But if we give them the right skills and instill the right mindset in them, then they'll be able to accomplish anything.
Thank you, Sabrina. And Joshua, have I lost you? Josh, you there? How about you? What was your experience of school as a black lad, and what was your experience going to university? What worked? What didn't work?
Truthfully, growing up, school was pretty hard. It was pretty hard. And not even because the assignments were difficult, but it was just boring. Like it didn't creatively entertain me. I didn't want to be there. Not necessarily because of the teachers or the students, it just wasn't a happy space. And I feel like most young black males experience that today. But what worked for me was I managed to find so many opportunities like Uprising, UK Youth, Youth Unemployment UK, and other charities that really helped support me and that gave me direction while I was still in school, which later gave me the motivation to go back. I think the problem isn't necessarily that there's no one out there who looks like me, who does certain fields. It's a case of it doesn't interest me. Like seeing certain people do certain stuff that, you know, it just wasn't my cup of tea as well. And I feel like you have to be honest with yourself in what you can do and what your capabilities are, rather than blame, not necessarily blame, but you kind of make excuses. Because one thing I was taught when I came here was that we do have to work 3 times as hard. Like it is unconscious bias, but it's there. And in order to tackle that, you have to really put yourself out there. But luckily for me, it was through brands like Uprising and UK Youth that really gave me better direction and worked with me on a one-to-one case and helped me understand what I can do that works for me. So that's
and Josh, when we chatted last week, you were quite passionate about the fact that you feel like there's not enough in society or in communities perhaps for young people. Can you just speak to that?
I don't think there is. I think there's a blurred line between it, because there's opportunities that are there, they're open, but they haven't been tailored. You see, it's tricky because I don't want to say it shouldn't be tailored towards black people. However, there isn't anything black within those settings that would, you know, make a black person want to be involved, or anybody from the BME community. So it's a blurred line. It's very difficult to understand it from both sides, because if I had a friend who was in the UK Youth Voice before I went into it, who actually explained it to me and made it much more comforting for me to get involved with. Likewise, if I didn't have a friend who was involved with it before I got there, it might have made me a little less interested or less involved. And that is something that's my own fault. And I can imagine a lot of other students are like that as well, where we eliminate ourselves from a process because of our fears of equality or not enough diversity and so on and so.
And just to follow up on that, so I mean, I was a teacher in London for a long time, very, very diverse schools, a lot of boys' schools as well. And I know that the black boys who I taught had a real sense of injustice about how they were treated out in the streets compared to their white peers. And I'm thinking about one lad in particular who ended up representing the UK at the Olympics because he found table tennis. He was a young lad from Streatham, and table tennis picked him off the streets. And he had like a really kind of like positive structured thing to do. But a lot of his mates did fall into the wrong crowds and were doing the wrong things. So, I mean, we've got head teachers, chairs of governors listening, Josh. What kind of things do you think schools and community centres could and should be offering?
Patience. I really believe it's patience, man. You have to understand with a system that I'm not saying it's in our favor or it's not, that's not, but I'm saying we have the assumption already that the system's already against us. So if you aren't patient and you're not willing to understand us properly, then that division comes into place, and it almost certainly affects the BME student a lot more than they know, because it's only really when you start looking for better opportunities or in corporate places that you really start to self-sabotage, and you say things along the lines of, I can't work here because, you know, there's not enough black people, they don't hire people, they don't do this, they don't do that. And you kind of already you've eliminated yourself out of that process already. So I feel like patience is a very key fact, like one big factor that is needed in order to help BME students within high schools and secondary schools. And that's just going off myself, because I know I had no interest for what teaching, like I had no interest in it whatsoever until these charities did focus and help me on a one-to-one intimate level.
So what I'm hearing is actually it's not just in schools, it's outside of school. It's almost like there has to be like a smooth line that runs between when you're in education and when you're outside of education, because it won't work if it's here in one bubble, it's all right, and then you move out and it's a different bubble. It's just not streamlined, right? I mean, going to Sabrina, do you agree that this is important, that smooth line between context is there? And in your experience, you know, what are the activities outside of school? What kind of activities kind of help? What helps? What's worked? What's been successful?
I think outside of school, or just in general, the need is we need to ensure that young people, whether they're black or not, that they feel like they belong. Because if someone doesn't feel like they belong, then their behaviours are going to align to that. So, for example, if I talk about a school setting, if a child doesn't feel like they belong in school, they are more likely to show disruptive behaviour. So then when they're sent out of the classroom, that's going to show to them, or in their head, they're going to think, oh, this just proves my point that I don't belong. If it's in terms of society, if someone feels like they don't belong in society, then they're not going to put themselves forward for certain opportunities because they feel like they've got no place in society. So there needs to be a sense of belonging. And I think a sense of belonging can be created in various ways. You don't necessarily have to work with young people. It could be that you see a young person walking down the street, and let's say, for example, it's results day. You could say, oh, how did your results day go? It could be when you see a young person, instead of feeling maybe a little bit apprehensive, you know, you smile at them. It's about being welcoming. It's about making young people feel like they belong in society and that they're a valuable addition. So although I'm aware that a lot of people who are watching today are educators, I want to make the point you don't have to be an educator. I think it's all our duty to make young people feel like they belong, because at the end of the day, these young people are the people who are going to be the people of society in the future. And if people don't feel like they belong, they are going to be more likely to get involved in crime, because in a gang, that's where a lot of young people, when we run our programs, actually, they say that gangs offer them that sense of belonging. And for them, if they'd have got that sense of belonging from their parents or teachers or maybe friends, then they wouldn't have necessarily gone down that route. And I think to show also a sense of belonging, it's about showing empathy. And I think people get confused with empathy and compassion. Compassion is to say, oh, I understand, or you're showing that you can relate. But empathy is a deeper meaning. It's saying, although I may not necessarily understand completely what you've experienced, I can put myself in your shoes. And if we show empathy, the young person is going to feel more likely to want to speak to you. And then you can get to the root issue as to why they don't belong. Or, for example, in my case, we can get to the root issue of why they're showing persistent disruptive behaviour in school, which therefore is going to make them more likely to be excluded. And I think the other key thing is support. There needs to be a support system. So there needs to be a support system at school, whether that's pastoral care or whether that's engaging in services such as SHS, but also outside of school. So are there youth clubs that young people can go to? Is there a sense of community? Because if you're not getting support from one area in a positive way, you're going to seek support in another way, and that is not necessarily going to be in a positive way. And again, that's when exploitation in terms of gangs will come into play, because gangs will kind of like prey on the vulnerable, and they'll go after the young people who don't have a good support system. So if we don't support our young people, we don't show them empathy, and at the end of the day, we don't allow them to feel like they belong, unfortunately, they are more likely to enter routes that they otherwise wouldn't have necessarily gone down. And I believe it's all of our responsibilities to enable young people to feel like they do belong in society.
Thank you, Sabrina. And absolutely, like, belonging and being happy and being comfortable, but we can't learn if we're not happy and we're not comfortable, we don't have a sense of belonging. And I do think we need to start at that piece in our schools and in society. And hands up, my generation's got it wrong. My generation above me's got it wrong. And I find it really inspiring that we've got young people such as yourself who are leading that change. And one of the questions is, to you, Josh, from one of the head teachers listening, like, what could your school have done differently for you to have had a happier experience in the education system? Like, because there's probably lads like yourself in the system right now who are disengaged and not inspired and aren't very happy. Like, what are some of the practical things that some of the heads and chairs and governors can do to try and fix it now for other people?
Really and truthfully, it's hard for me to even blame the school, because I'd be lying if I said that my primary school, my high school didn't put in the effort with me as a student at that time when I was younger. But I'd also say as well, like, I feel like what they could have done better was they didn't need to be as quick to call parents and stuff like that and threaten students, like things along those lines. That wouldn't have been the best approach. However, I do also understand that sometimes as a person, not even as a teacher, when you look beyond it and the human being itself, it would be very easy to lose patience with a student who you are dealing with for 3-4 years of your life, and you know what they're like, and you know what they're like, and you know that they're stubborn. But I really do believe it was a case of like having better patience and not always reporting, or not always not taking my side, or little thing like trying to just understand me better. And I could probably say the same about most students as well, most BME students who, because I'm from London and I also lived up north as well, and it's kind of the same problem everywhere where teachers are they're losing patience very quickly, which it is understandable. I do say it's understandable, but to me, to have had a better primary school experience, secondary school experience, it would definitely have been the teachers being more patient with me and like sitting me down and helping me understand, and not being quick to report me or send me to detention, or finding different ways to punish me for things that I don't necessarily think is wrong. Like, if you help me understand why without chastising me or attacking me, then I feel like we'll reach a better middle ground. Yeah.
Thanks, Josh. So what I'm hearing is kind of like being seen, being heard, having someone who puts the time and the effort in to understand you and understand what motivates you. And if I can swing that question to you, Sabrina, you've got the experience of being in a school, but you now work in schools, across schools, supporting those young people who are at risk of being excluded. You're there listening ear. Like, what are some of the changes that you want to see from schools and the school system to re-engage those young people who are at risk of being excluded?
So the main thing that I'd say is all of these students, because the most common reason for that, students get permanently or fixed period excluded because of persistent disruptive behaviour. Now, that could be something such as throwing someone across the room or being silly or making silly noises. But the point I'd say is that there's always a reason behind behaviour. And we need to be asking ourselves, what is the reason? What's the why? That, for example, if a baby was crying, we wouldn't just assume, oh, they're naughty. You'd think, oh, are they hungry? Do they need their nappy changed? Are they upset? Do they need comforting? But when it comes to students, I find that we're very easy to just assume, oh, they're just being disruptive because they're just disruptive. And in my experience, there's been various reasons as to why students have been disruptive. One example is that a student couldn't read and the school hadn't picked this up and he was embarrassed. So therefore, he'd be disruptive that he got sent out of the classroom because he'd rather be sent out than be embarrassed with the fact that he couldn't read the play that they were doing. Other examples that the student's been exploited, so therefore they don't know how to deal with that they're being exploited to join a gang, and that was coming out in the classroom. There's been various situations when there's been abuse at home. Sometimes it's due to low self-esteem, sometimes it's due to bullying. There's a range of issues, but the point is there's always a reason. And even if two students have been disruptive because they've both got low self-esteem, even in that instance, you can't necessarily treat those students the same because they're two different people. So we need to understand why a student is behaving in a certain way, but then we need to take the time to build a rapport with that student so that we can help them better themselves. Because if we're immediately saying, oh, you're being disruptive, out you go, and now they've been sat in the classroom 1,000 times and then they do get excluded, for them, that's just reaffirming to them that they don't belong, because to them, nobody has taken the time to find out why they're behaving in that way. And I think another important thing is that in schools especially, educators need to be careful of the language that they're using, because students do they do focus on language a lot. So for example, I've worked with young people and they say, oh, I'm bad because, you know, my teacher 5 years ago said I'm bad. And then some of these students, because I've got contacts who work in prisons, for example, with young people, and they say some of these students, they're still referring to themselves as these same labels that the teachers gave to them all those years ago. So it's really important that we are using positive words. Of course, if a student does do something wrong, they do need to be held accountable for their actions, but there's a way to go about it. And that's why I say at HS, we do a program where we work with the students who are most likely to get excluded, but it's about building rapport with the students and allowing them to know that they do belong in the classroom and that someone actually does care as to why they're behaving in the way they're behaving, and we're there to help them. And the change in which I see in the students, you wouldn't know it's the same student at the end of the 12-week program, because for them, a lot of them don't have a support system and they don't have any role models, and they don't have anyone to talk to. So I think it's important that schools do have mentors there, or they do invest in programs such as SATOHS, because at the end of the day, some of these young people are facing problems that adults couldn't even imagine. And a lot of these young people, you know, your brain doesn't stop developing till you're 18. So a lot of these young people, they've got also a lot of trauma, they've faced adverse childhood experiences. And for them, the school environment, it can be overwhelming. So if we really want to nurture our young people, we need to be investing in them, and we need to treat each individual as a person, because we are all individuals and nobody's the same. And if we are empathetic towards these young people and we are supportive, change will occur, but it starts with us, and it starts with the language that we use, and it starts with investing in these young people, because if we don't, then we can't be surprised if young people go down a different route, which isn't necessarily desirable.
Thank you, Sabrina. I'm from both of you, I'm hearing patience as, you know, a key word in for everybody who wants to help in this agenda, is to have that. And I guess to understand that nobody wakes up in the morning with the intention to piss off a teacher, really. I mean, not mostly, right? Nobody does that. And it's usually there's something really much deeper going on, and to understand it's so critical. Now, I want to ask you, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about talks about how to, you just help somebody move from a disadvantaged situation to just being in the normal playing field. But I want to ask, actually, to move that forward, is what are the things that you think teachers, head teachers, we can do to actually help move it from just getting into a space of normalcy to leadership? How do we encourage more people to actually step into the space of leadership? Like, if you think about when you were younger, what could they have done? What could people have done to encourage you to actually step into the space of leadership much sooner? Maybe Josh, can I ask you first?
I'm sorry, can you ask that question again? Sorry, I didn't really understand.
No worries.
Too well. Sorry.
So what could schools, teachers, head teachers, what could they have done while you were in school to encourage you to step into a leadership position, you know, a position of pushing for change? What could they do, maybe not for yourself, but for other young people now? How can they encourage them to actually step forward like you did?
Well, in my case, I feel like mine was just because I wanted to, but I feel like teachers, students, they should. When I was in school, our teachers had our selected leaders, our selected people. They already had people in mind, and I feel like just putting them, not giving the choice of not being a leader should be taken away completely. Taking that option away of not having to do this or not having to do something, just ensuring that regardless of whether you're going to use this in your everyday life, being being equipped with the tools and the skills needed in order to progress is what you've come to school to attain. So I feel like pushing it and forcing it on students is the best way for them to appreciate it in the long run, in terms of leadership and, you know, well-being and so on.
So, Sabrina, can I ask you the same question?
I think schools can focus on what qualities the student has. So, for example, if a student's always really loud and they always seem to, for instance, be kind of like the class clown, that can actually be interpreted in a positive way, because it shows that actually they've got a loud voice, they'll be good at public speaking. In terms of the class clown, they've got humour and leadership. You know, sometimes you need humour as well. So I think it's about seeing what qualities a student has and letting them positively direct that somewhere else. Or, for example, if someone is, you know, when it comes to group work and they always seem to be taking the lead, giving them opportunities. You might say, oh, have you thought about going for the student council? And actually seeing what their aspirations are and seeing how you can guide them. But also not only that, because some leaders, they don't necessarily know that they're leaders. It's about empowering young people, letting them consider that although you may think that you're not a leader because you're not the first person to put your hand up in class, that's fine, because leaders, they don't have to look the same, they don't have to have certain qualities. It's about, if you're passionate about something, you can lead on it, because that passion is what's going to drive whatever you're talking about forward. So I think it's about empowering young people to think that they can be leaders, because I feel like sometimes we've got a certain image of what we think a leader is. You know, you say they might have to be confident, they've got to be an extrovert, they've got to have done certain GCSEs or gone to university, etc. And that's not the case. I think the main point is that anyone can be a leader, but not everyone is empowered to feel like they can be. And I feel that's what schools can do. They can empower their students, and especially students who are being disruptive and being a bit silly in class. If you give these students actually something where they can have some sense of responsibility, it could be something simple as, I don't know, handing out the pens. But if you give them a task where they can do something, it actually allows them to think, oh, I can be trusted to do this. And then you can build up to a bigger thing. So I think it's seeing those small opportunities where you can encourage leadership. And that's what schools could be doing.
That's great advice there from both you, Josh and Sabrina, because like I've worked in 6 different schools and I've seen different cultures in all of them. And I think your point, Josh, there is really key, that you tend to have the same kids wheeled out all the time because they're the best public speakers and they're the kind of the cherries, and they might all be white boys, for example. And I can remember being on SLT where the student council long list came, and the 10 people who had been shortlisted were all of the same gender and all of the same race. And I was like, not on my watch. And I think sometimes we need to make sure we are diversifying those pools. And like your point there, Sabrina, it's about playing to individual strengths and creating opportunities as well. So actually, like, you don't have to just have 10 student council in the whole school. You can have sports leaders, you can have assembly leaders, you can have enrichment leaders. It's finding those opportunities for leadership skills to be taught. And I'm interested to hear from both of you, like the training you've experienced as young adults from UK Youth, like what things have you experienced that actually we should be simulating in a school environment? Because you got developed as adults, as youth speakers and youth advocates, but are there things that actually schools could learn from what's happening in the charity sector and happening in community? So Josh, do you want to go first with that, about some of the things you've been exposed to and some of the things that perhaps schools could do?
Well, I think UK Youth, they didn't necessarily give me the skills, because I've been doing a lot of charity stuff, but they definitely enhanced it and helped me like push it into certain directions. But certain things they've done for me is I've spoken in Parliament multiple times. I've done consultancy for companies. I've had opportunities to meet business organizations like PwC, where I've done small little projects here and there. And overall, I feel like that in itself has helped giving me better direction. And I feel like if schools were to do more were to do more, you know, outdoor trips and more life experiences, then they'd have a better connection with their BME students. Well, that was the case for me.
That's great, Josh. And that's really tangible for the people who are listening. So it's basically about the skills are there. It's about refining and enhancing the skills, but through simulated experiences. And actually, what I know from some of the BME kids I've taught is that they haven't got the same network, perhaps. So actually having those opportunities to be connected to and exposed to the corporate environments, which we know that particular demographics have got a kind of a backdoor pass to. So that's a really good tip there about that exposure. Sabrina, how about you? What kind of things you've experienced could schools actually benefit from bringing into the school system?
I think it would depend on each school, and I would say there isn't an answer which would fit all schools, but I think the main thing is thinking about what are the majority of your students interested in. So for example, if your school is really passionate about climate change, what could we do as a school as a project, or what opportunities could we give our students to do leadership? And with UKU, what's really good is the fact that, for example, what Josh is interested in, I'm not necessarily interested in, but we've got our opportunities to go down that route. And I think the problem is sometimes, though, with leadership things at school, it's just one topic, and not everyone's interested in that, so therefore they're not going to get involved. So I think we need to have a more flexible approach as to what topics. For example, when you're coming up with the topics, are you just coming up with them, or have you consulted the young people in the first place to say, okay, let's do a poll, and then based on that? So I think young people need to be involved in the decision-making process from the beginning, because if they're not, then whatever the activity is going to be, it's not necessarily going to be reflective of what the young people want in the first place. I think that's the first issue. And especially if we want to engage BAME students more, that's especially the case, because if the students aren't consulted, there may be whatever topics that the school comes up with is only representative of the white students. So therefore, the BAME students are never going to go for those opportunities in the first place. So therefore, they're going to be missing out. And it's not necessarily because the school doesn't want to cater for them, but it's because the right people weren't consulted in the first place. So I think the main thing is that we always need to tailor our approach, and then we should make the system fit the students rather than make the students fit the system, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely, Sabrina. I agree with everything you've said there. And we start with the listening. And I worry at the moment, since George Floyd's murder, since the kind of the very reactive, knee-jerk responses that I'm seeing in the education system to suddenly doing diversity and equity work, that might have been decided over the summer without talking to children and without listening to the young people who those opportunities are actually for. So I think we need to start slowly with the listening and garner what it is we actually need to do, so it's personalised and it's tailored. And if we think about the kind of the next level of education, like you're at university, Josh, you've graduated, Sabrina. I'm interested, Joshua, about your experience at 2 different universities. Like, what could the higher education space do better, or what could schools learn from higher education about some of the things that worked for you when you got to your degree?
I'm not too sure, because I was the one actively looking for it, though. I was actively looking for things because I didn't want to be in classes. But I'd say the truth of it is that, like, what was good with Northampton and with Anglia as well is they do have a wide range of activities for people to keep themselves busy with, and I'm sure that that's the same with most universities. I say the only issue the only issues with them was there wasn't a lot of BAME students involved, but at the same time it was their choice to not be involved as well. So it's a bit of a, slippery slope, because I was involved and I did want other black students involved as a BME officer when I was in Northampton, but you can't force someone to do something they're not interested in, regardless of whether it helps them in the long run or the short run at all. So I'd say, Matt, I saw the opportunities in both of them, truthfully speaking.
So I asked you just to expand that by, if we've got young black people listening who are about to go into sixth form, about to go to university, like, what's your advice to them about perhaps taking advantage of some of those opportunities? Because that's what I'm hearing as a BAME officer. You wanted them to actually grasp them.
Yeah, definitely. I'd take advantage of every opportunity, every opportunity that comes your way, because it only helps you stand out more when you've graduated uni. We live in a system where we're put to compete against each other, and it really is the best of the best. And since we live in a time of nepotism and other stuff related to that, it is extremely hard. And one way to show your value is by filling up your CV with extracurricular activities, which could which makes you an undeniable force when you apply for certain jobs, because your value is way more than what you have to offer.
Thank you, Josh. And Sabrina, how about you? You went to Kingston Uni. Like, what was your experience of going to uni? Are there things that worked, things that didn't work, and what can we learn from a school system, perhaps from your university experience?
I would say at Kingston University, there was definitely diverse students, but also lecturers. So I think that goes back to my original point about if there's diverse lecturers, obviously that for me, that was great to show, okay, I don't want to be a lecturer, but if I ever did, that would be encouraging to see, oh, I can see someone that looks like me. But also having a diverse cohort, for me, that was really great, because at school, that wasn't something I ever experienced. So already I felt more kind of like included and welcome. And I think the main thing in terms of diversity at Kingston, which they were really good at doing, is that if you wanted to set up a society, for example, you could, and it was based on your passion or what you're interested in. And I think that's something which I think schools could apply as well, encouraging students to use their entrepreneurial skills or leadership skills. If there's something which they're really interested in, they might set up a new club, or it might be a society, or it might be a new campaign. I think we should be encouraging that. And I think the other thing is that if young people aren't encouraged to set up things which they're passionate at, for example, at school, they're not necessarily going to be as likely to then want to set up anything in the future which they're passionate about, because that wasn't nurtured and encouraged at school. So therefore they may be less likely to get involved in entrepreneurial things if that's their mindset. And I think what's also really important in terms of at university, they're very good in terms of saying, is there something that we're not doing which we could do better? So getting feedback and actually respond to that feedback. So there used to be like a survey called, oh, you said this is what we did. So actually seeing your opinions and thoughts put into practice, I think that's really important, because sometimes I feel like a lot of students at schools don't feel like they're listened to. And that's a lot of feedback that at SAOHS that we get, that students don't feel like their school's listening to them. They don't feel like they belong. So therefore, they don't really care about education because they feel like nobody cares about them. So I think that's a really important thing which could be taken into account.
Now, I want to ask a question outside of education. So I want to ask you about allyship, but outside of education. So not with students, not with teachers, head teachers. If you were your neighbor two houses down, maybe a housewife, somebody outside of a position where they can make change. I know so many people who have really been, their eyes opened up to how privileged they are, or how, for the first time, really understanding the issue when people are dying. So it's no longer people are actually dying because of this issue, right? And so a lot more people are like, really, what can I do? So what can you suggest, or what can you recommend to a person who is just a normal person down the street? What can they do to actually help this agenda? Sabrina, can I start with you?
I think the most important thing to say is, by doing nothing, that's the worst thing you can do. So to help the agenda, you need to be willing to learn, and that might be asking questions, but that also might mean you watching a film or reading a piece of research. So you need to be open to educating yourself, because everyone's got things to learn. I'm learning new things every day, and I think we need to have the mindset that we're willing to learn and sometimes admit that we're wrong. And the other things in terms of what we can do, I think it goes back to my original point of, if you saw a young person walking down the street, it's being welcoming. You don't know, for example, how the small acts that you do can really help a young person. So I think we should be taking every opportunity to nurture young people, to make young people feel like they belong. And I think sometimes people think you can only help young people if you're working with them in a school, or if you're working with them at university. But I think we will all come into contact with young people throughout our life. And I think it's important that we use every opportunity to be as positive and as much of a role model as we can be. And I think the worst thing that we could do is to say, well, the issue doesn't affect me, so I'm not going to get involved. Because if everyone took that mindset, then nothing would change. And if we really want to change things, people need to be doing more. And to do better, we need to be better ourselves. We need to reflect on ourselves, how we may be contributing to the issue in a positive or negative way. And if we're contributing in a really positive way, how can we amplify what we're doing and inspire other people to also carry on amplifying that? Or if we're contributing in a negative way, what can we do to better ourselves? Is it that we need to have difficult conversations? Is it that we need to better inform ourselves by speaking to certain people? So I think a lot of the work starts within people, because if we don't recognise how we're contributing, whether negative or positive situation, then we're not going to know how we can better improve the situation for young people.
Thanks, Ab. How about you, Josh? Do you have anything to add?
I feel like that question was a little ambiguous for me. So would it be like, could you be more precise? Sorry, I didn't really understand the question.
Sorry.
So,
but outside of education, if you were to advise somebody who, a housewife or somebody down the street, if they ask you, how can I be a better ally for this agenda? How can I help people, create more inclusive spaces? Just the normal person, what can they do?
Well, first of all, my thing is, in order to see change, one must be in a position of change. So I don't really believe, if you're a normal person, truthfully, the only way you can help without coming across as, as some form of positive discrimination, or still keeping to the whole concept of equality and equity, is just respect. Because regardless of anything and everything, you can't hold someone accountable to society's expectations. I can't expect you to want to see me do well, or you have the option of choosing that. But I say the only way for somebody outside of that community to support is just by respecting. And once you build that certain level of respect, then you realize that you can open up other doors of conversation, but it starts with the respect first. And ignorance is one detrimental factor, because ignorance breeds fear. So I feel like also helping them understand and breeding the awareness. But outside of those two, if you're not in a position where you can actually make crucial change, then all I would say is just respect. Have that respect on a human level, not based on any color or gender, just on a humanitarian level.
Thanks, Josh. I think that's great advice, because it is we're all human beings. We've all got equal rights to be in the world, and just basic respect for living people is a simple human requirement, and it's staggering how many people can't do that. And just thinking about this kind of change agency that you're both driving in your own respective spheres, I want you just to share with the listeners, what are the changes that you want to bring? So, Joshua, with the work you're doing as someone at university, with the stuff you do in the volunteer space, what's the goal? What's the ambition? What change do you want to drive in society?
Well, I feel like the change that I make, I'm not sure. I'm not too sure. I'm not going to lie.
Are you thinking, Tom? I'll go to Sabrina. Do you want to think about it? I'll go to Sabrina. I'll come back to you.
Go ahead.
Take a moment to think about it. Sabrina, because you've obviously got your social enterprise. So what's your goal with Say It With Your Chest?
So my goal is, I'm not sure how many listeners are aware, but there's 3 groups of students in the student population who are most likely to get excluded. So that's students who are eligible for free school meals, students from the Black minority ethnic community, and students with special education need. So my whole goal would be that these students aren't disproportionately excluded, that schools use more early intervention to help these students, because there's a concept called the school to prison pipeline, and being excluded from school actually pushes a student further towards going down that pipeline. For example, if a student is excluded at 12, they're 4 times more likely to be jailed as an adult than their peers. So there's lots of negative consequences that can occur from being excluded, but I don't necessarily think that people are aware of some of these consequences. For example, if you're excluded, you're more likely to get involved in youth violence, or over 50% of the prison population was excluded. And as a society, also, it's costing us money to exclude these students. For example, for one student to be permanently excluded, over their lifetime, to this day, it costs around £370,000, which obviously is a lot of money. But if we'd have put in early intervention and actually helped this student and nurtured them, we wouldn't only be helping them as a person, but as a society, we could use that money in other ways, which would, like, for example, for youth clubs, because that's what young people want. So I think my main thing would be is reducing exclusion rates for these young people, but also informing people as to what they can do to better the lives of young people, whether they work in a school or not.
Thank you, Sabrina. And just when I first met you, just the fact that you set up your own social enterprise fresh out of uni in your early 20s, I think that's so inspiring that, in your own words, you didn't see the role you wanted to do, so you went and created your own organisation, your own role. And I think that's really, really empowering for young people to see that you don't need to be defined by the confines of what's out there. You can navigate your own path. And Josh, without putting words into your mouth, I mean, when we first met, you were really passionate about you and your journey and what you needed to achieve as an individual in order to fulfill your goals. Do you want to share that?
I wouldn't say. I'd say long-term goal would be just to show that regardless of the issues that society might think that we experience and that we go through, as an individual, you still have choices that you can make in order for you to reach whatever goals that you have. And I feel like to somewhat be an example of that is probably how I can best give back to society, as someone who's lived in London, who's lived up north, who's lived in various BAME communities. I feel like just showing people that it isn't as hard as how they make it out to be. Believe it or not. There are options. There are things out there that could benefit you a lot more. It's just not transparent, and you always need to be ready to receive whatever opportunities you have on guard, so as you don't miss out, because you don't know that one opportunity could be the thing that changes your life drastically. So I feel like my change is more on intimate one-to-one level, where, because my mantra is, in order to have change, you need to be in a position of change. So mine's very more intimate with the one-to-one. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Josh. So that's it. I think we've run out of time, Hannah. It's 3 minutes to 11. So before we end, I just want to ask Sabrina and Joshua, what is your final takeaway, that key message that you want to leave our audience today? Sabrina, can we start with you?
I'd say my key takeaway would be that we've all got a duty, and we've all play a part in shaping young people's lives. And I think we need to do better and be better for these young people. And I think we can do that through various ways. But the most important thing, I think, is talking to these young people about what they need and what they want. And I think if we start with that, that's a good place to go. And if you don't work with young people, we're just talking about the ordinary person, I think just be welcoming and just treat other people how you'd want to be treated. So I think that's the main thing. And the worst thing to do is to do nothing, and for us to be having the same conversation in a year's time, because then nothing's changed.
Thanks, Sabrina. Josh?
I'd say what I'd want to leave is teachers and university teachers, you have a fiduciary obligation towards students. So please, just to be patient with your students, because not everyone has the same opportunities and not everyone has the same level of understanding. And sometimes, really being specific with students, or pinpointing, if you do try to work, you're more likely going to see results than you are punishing students. So that's all I'd leave. Patience and understanding.
Isa, how about you? What's your takeaway today?
Right. It's fantastic conversation. Thank you guys for guesting today. For me, Josh will be happy to hear. I am thinking patience. I'm going to be a lot more patient. And with that, I'm connecting that to my own resilience and reminding myself that the change is not going to happen quickly. It's a journey. It's not a commute. And so patience is key. And, key to patience is having resilience and looking after myself and making sure I have space to be patient. And from Sab, my key takeaway is make sure people feel that they belong. belong. A key word, and if that help, if with that will help my behavior, drive what my behavior is when I know belonging. That's it. How about you, Hannah?
I think mine's just listening. I go back to that analogy that we have two ears and one mouth for a reason, and we should be listening twice as much as we talk. And I think that's what some of the messages coming through from the educators today is, like, really listening to student voice, parent voice, staff voice, community voice, and making sure that our well-meaning gestures are actually speaking to what is needed rather than what we think is needed. So I think that's my kind of main takeaway. I just want to say, Sabrina and Joshua, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute privilege to listen to you. You're both so inspiring, and I'm very hopeful with you guys like doing this work about the change that can bring. And thank you also to UK Youth, and in particular Kaylee and Emma, for all their help prepping for today's show. Next Sunday, we are being joined by Didnt Johnson. Didnt Johnson on social media is known as the Womanologist. She is a multi-award-winning women's champion in diversity, equity, and authenticity, and she looks at feminine influence as a leadership style through her coaching and through her strategic allyship. So please join us next Sunday at 10 o'clock with Didnt. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Absolutely brilliant to listen to Sab and Josh. So take care. Thank you.